We've added this quote from Maya Angelou that talks about the importance of being grounded in your history. And for us, people of African descent, Africa is where everything starts, because being grounded is so important to where you go and where you end and how you get there. Our story starts in Africa, but we, like many people, are very widespread. Our African diaspora touches on many parts of the world, and you will see that reflected in your storytellers today, as this map also represents. So we are in every part of the world.
Do you want the microphone?
Today's storytellers, we have planned to have 4. We currently have 3 of them with us now, but their stories are exciting. So if for some reason our 4th storyteller does not make it, you still have an experience that you will well remember. Our first storyteller is Mikki Murphy, and we're going to invite her to the storytellers here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So I am Mary Lacey Murphy, known by many people as Mikki, and this is my family story. I've been a resident of New Jersey. Oh, sorry. Let's see if I can bring it around.
Yeah, make it comfortable for you.
This works better? Okay, that works for me. Can everyone hear? Yeah.
I just want you to be comfortable without the strength. Is that good?
Yes, that's good.
Can you
Thank
hear well?
you.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, and I hope you'll excuse my notes. I want to thank Audrey for inviting me to do this. It really gave me an opportunity to look back and to have some conversations, particularly with my mom, about our family story. So I've taken some notes, and I'm going to use these to share with you. So I was born in Louisiana. I spent 1 year in New York City before moving with my family to Teaneck, New Jersey in Bergen County in 1961. And I've been a resident of New Jersey ever since. So we were part of the Great Migration. And I wanted to read just one quote from Richard Wright that really, I think, captures the spirit of that time. He says, "I was leaving the South to fling myself into the unknown. I was taking a part of the South to transplant an alien soil, to see if it could grow differently, if it could drink of new and cool rains, bend in strange winds, respond to the warmth of other suns, and perhaps to bloom." So until Isabel Wilkerson's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Warmth of Other Suns, I don't know if our family thought of ourselves as part of a bigger or larger social or historical moment or movement. But on hindsight, it's very clear that our reasons for leaving the South were definitely part of a larger narrative. We haven't done much genealogy in my family. I think we're all just very busy. But we've always embraced our connection to the continent of Africa. And on both sides, on my maternal side and my paternal side, our family came straight from Africa to the United States. So we don't have any connection to countries other than whatever country we hail from in West Africa, which we do not yet know, and the United States. But my dad always wanted us to embrace our heritage, and my parents were educators. So in July and August, we typically took trips, we traveled. Often back to the South to visit our relatives, or to Chicago where other relatives had migrated. And even one year we drove to California with makeshift air conditioning in the car. But in 1972, my dad, for several years, I think, he saved money and decided in 1972 to take our family to Europe and Africa. And I can remember people questioning him and saying, why are you going there? And my sister was 5 at the time and saying, you're gonna take her too? And I remember him saying, well, what am I gonna leave her here? Of course I'm gonna take her. He had been in World War II. He had been stationed in France and also in the Philippines, and he wanted us to see. And we did actually go to the town in France where he was stationed. We saw the field where they had set up camp. But he said, I'm not going to take you all to Europe and not also take you to Africa. So that was a trip of a lifetime, and I think it was sort of enough for us for a time to know that we had a connection. We actually went to East Africa, Kenya. We also went to Ghana, Senegal, and Liberia. So I think we had a strong connection, and really, haven't, as I said, had the time to do further research. But my father was a scientist, so I'm sure if he had been alive when when Ancestry and 23andMe came along, he would have been an eager researcher. So our first country after Africa was America. When asked where we're from, we'd say Alabama. And we know our family lineage back as far as my great-grandparents on my father's side and great-great-grandparents on my mother's side. We have names. Oh, yes, names, and we have dates of birth. So in this picture, which you can see is, I'm going to call it artwork because the picture was so badly damaged that it couldn't be restored. At least it has not yet been restored. So I said, well, I can make an art piece out of it, and that's a work in progress. It's not yet that art piece, but in this picture you see my great-grandmother and great-grandfather, who are the adults in the picture, and my grandmother, who is one of the little girls in the picture. And my great-grandparents were born in 1878 and 1879. We do know that their parents were enslaved, but we don't know much more about them. I think the next picture is of my great-grandmother on my father's side.
Yes,
Yes. And this is the only picture we have that is in a portrait style. It's actually in one of those big oval frames with, kind of a wooden frame and a bowl type glass in front of it. It's the only one we have, and it's interesting to me because I don't think, I don't know anyone who ever knew her. But she was the mother of my grandmother, my father's mother, who was born in 1884, who had 16 children. She and my grandfather, out of one union, had 16 children, and my father was the 13th child. So I shared this picture and these dates with you because when I work at a school, when I tell students, like, my grandfather was born in 1883, they cannot believe it. But it is true. My father was the 13th of 16, so if you think about the time span. And really it just reminds me that it just wasn't that long ago. The fact that my grandfather's parent was born before emancipation, and that I'm sitting here telling this story, I think is a story of triumph. And there are many such stories, and I think it really gives me such pain to think that many of these stories are being not told, or so much pushback on telling history is happening. That's very distressing to me. So moving on, I happen to have come from a long line of educated people. My great-grandfather, who was in the original picture, learned to read and write. And he actually spent some time at the school that is now Hampton University. That was at the time called the Hampton Normal School, I think it was called. And he became a mail carrier in rural Alabama. And my mother has told me many times that the person who owned the town, and there was someone who sort of owned the town and owned the general store, said once my grandfather had sat for the civil service test and passed it very glowingly, that when a colored person learns to read, you're robbing the cotton patch. But both my great-grandparents were educated. My great-grandmother was a teacher, and again, my great-grandfather was a rural mail carrier. And that's on my mom's side. My mom is from Montgomery, the capital city of Alabama, and my dad was from a coal mining town outside of Birmingham that no longer exists. They both experienced all the indignities of living under Jim Crow segregation. My mom talks about not being able to go to parks, to the zoo, to the pool, to the movies, all of the things we take for granted, to try and close in the department store. And one story that has always stuck with me is that she said her mom used to draw the outline of her foot and cut out a piece of cardboard and take that to the store to get a shoe in her size because they would not allow her to try on shoes in the shoe store. But Montgomery was also a college town. The Alabama State College, Alabama State University now, was founded in 1867, just after the Civil War. And so the college was sort of the center of Black mobility in the city. And some say it was because of this that the Montgomery bus boycott was able to succeed, because there was this strong group of educated people who really worked tirelessly to make that happen. My dad had attended Alabama State College, gone to World War II, came back, went to Howard University for starting a master's, but ended up finishing at Northwestern University. And he came back to teach at Alabama State, just as my mom was graduating from there and starting to teach at high school in the town. But they met and married very quickly during the Montgomery bus boycott. My grandmother was very close friends with Rosa Parks, and my mother's father was the president of the Board of Trustees at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church when Martin Luther King was called to be the pastor there. And so they immediately were fully involved in all of the activities of the boycott. And I tell this story because I think this is where they became who they were. And that is why I am, and my family, we are who we are. Alabama State College was behind the scenes of the Montgomery bus boycott, and very much involved in things like writing letters to Northerners to get funds to make sure that the cars, had servicing and gas, etc. They did. This is one I'm always a little freaked out about. My mother said she used to drive behind Martin Luther King so that she could report back to Coretta Scott King that he had arrived safely at his destination, because he was harassed all the time. They also gave rides to people, who were avoiding riding on the buses. So the boycott, as you may know, lasted over a year, 381 days, I think. And being a professor at the college, my father's job was then somewhat in jeopardy, because although it was a successful initiative, the state, there was state funding for the college, and the funding was reduced, and there was a commission that was looking into investigating professors who had been involved in the boycott. So he started looking for another job. And he ended up getting one at another HBCU called Grambling College in Grambling, Louisiana. And that's where I was born. So they moved to Louisiana, and while they were there, I was born, but only lived there for about 2 years. My parents loved being in Grambling. The college was just vibrant. The football team was growing, the band was amazing, everything about it was fun, but the area surrounding the college was so segregated, so racist, so charged, that they really couldn't get comfortable. In fact, my mother and father drove 65 miles to Shreveport for me to be born, because my mother would not go to the local hospital, which required them to enter through the back and go to a different ward. Having had 3 children at St. Barnabas, 5 minutes from my house, I can't imagine driving 65 miles to deliver, but the things we do to preserve our dignity. And I appreciate that they did that. So while in Grambling, again, they began to be uncomfortable. My older brother was starting to see signs and ask what they meant, and wanting to use this water fountain and he couldn't, or wanting to go to the park and he couldn't go. And they were just not pleased. And my dad was involved with a National Science Foundation, and someone approached him about a job in New York, which he interviewed for, and then came to Hunter College in New York in, I believe, 1960. So we lived in Harlem for 1 year, and they craved grass and just something a little bit closer to what they were familiar with, and ended up moving to Teaneck, New Jersey. And while in Teaneck, I mean, they got there and dove right into being involved in integrating the school district, fair housing, all of the things you can imagine they were involved in. And that was all really, inspired and developed by the work they had done while they were in Montgomery. So I have lived in New Jersey for, I think, 90-some-odd% of my life. I lived in New York for a short time, in Pennsylvania for 2 years for graduate school, and I've lived in South Orange for almost 31 years, so almost 50% of my life. And it has been a joy. And I know we were asked what brought us here. I'm a Jersey girl, but I got to South Orange because a college friend who grew up in Newark moved here with his wife right after they got married, and he began recruiting people. And we ended up with a wonderful village that that is still very much intact. He has since retired to Florida, but we see them regularly, and his daughter, who graduated from Columbia, has now bought in South Orange. So the legacy continues. But I have enjoyed, my experience here that's been shaped by my village and the broader village of South Orange. When we moved to New Jersey from our apartment in New York, we looked in Montclair, but we really didn't look in any other towns because we just weren't interested in towns that weren't diverse. And so we moved into our home, and it's the only home we've lived in for the last 30 years. We're beginning to think about retirement, and the question keeps coming up, but where would we go? I don't know where to go. I can't imagine leaving, and maybe someday we will. So my hopes for the future. I have a fear for our country, a legitimate, strong fear for our country, but I have hope for these towns, for these 2 towns. And I think the only way to have healthy, multiracial, multi-religious, multi-ethnic communities is through proximity and through dialogue. And so I'm very committed to the work of the coalition. I think the prioritization of integration, not just diversity, but integration, and the opportunities that are presented here, such as this, conversations, the art circles, and so much more, really make hope possible. And so even as my confidence in the American experiment is kind of wavering, I'm very hopeful for SOMA, and so glad to be here. We just have to stay engaged. So thank you all for being here today.